What if the most important events in your life never really ended? What if they're still shaping the world right now? We think of time as something personal, something private. But time is never just yours. It's shared in families, communities, nations, and when shared time breaks down, reality itself becomes fragile. This video is about why time is not just something that passes, it's something we do together, and what happens when that shared work breaks down. Hello, this channel explores the phenomenology of the human experience of time, or PHET, a project about how time makes the mind. So far in this series, we've been talking about time at the level of individual experience. In part 1, we saw that clock time is an abstraction, not the foundation of experience. In part 2, we saw what follows from that. Events are not simply given, the self is not separate from the world, and meaning depends on temporal integration. But there's a question we haven't answered yet. If events depend on temporal integration, and if experience is never purely private, how is time shared? Because we don't just live in time alone. We live in families, communities, institutions, histories. Think again about the most important event in your life. Notice something strange. Even if the people involved are gone, even if the place no longer exists, the event itself hasn't ended. It still shapes how you understand the world, what you expect from others, what feels possible or impossible. This tells us something crucial. Events are not just moments in individual consciousness. They can outlive individuals. They can be inherited, transmitted, and reinterpreted, which means temporal integration is not just personal, it can be distributed. We often think of memory as storage, as if the past were archived somewhere and occasionally retrieved. But that picture doesn't survive what we've already seen. If events are ongoing processes of integration, then memory isn't about preserving the past. It's about keeping events alive in the present. Memory is not what happened. Memory is what is still being integrated. This is why the past can change without being falsified. Not because facts change, but because their meaning does. So if memory isn't storage, what happens when entire cultures forget? Now scale this up. Families don't just remember facts. They remember wounds, silences, loyalties. Communities don't just share information. They share unfinished events. Nations don't just tell stories. They organize time, deciding what counts as a beginning, what counts as an ending, and what must never be questioned. This is what it means to say that time is political. Not because of ideology, but because temporal integration is never neutral. Who gets to define what an event was, when it started, when it ended? Those are not abstract questions. They determine what is visible, what is sayable, and who counts as fully human. When temporal integration works, events can be placed, mourned, understood, and transformed. When it fails, something else happens. Events remain stuck. They return as repetition, as resentment, as trauma, as denial. At the individual level, we recognize this as psychological suffering. At the collective level, it shows up as social fracture. This is why PHET treats dehumanization not as a moral defect, but as a temporal failure. To deny someone's humanity is to deny their place in time, their past, their present meaning, or their future possibilities. And systems built on that denial ultimately reduce the temporal depth available to everyone within them. So if denying someone's humanity is a temporal failure, what does that mean for politics? From the inside, the breakdown of shared reality is often described as a crisis of meaning. People report disorientation, exhaustion, cynicism, the sense that nothing quite holds together anymore. But what is collapsing here is not meaning itself. What is collapsing is temporal integration. More precisely, it is the flattening of time. Any system, social, political, or epistemic, that collapses the past, freezes the present, or forecloses the future, reduces the space in which meaning can form. This is what oppression looks like at the level of time. Authoritarian systems make this especially clear. They erase or rewrite the past, they close off alternative futures, they treat plurality as a threat rather than a resource. Time is flattened in order to control what can be remembered, said, or hoped for. But temporal truncation does not only appear in overt authoritarianism. It also appears wherever a dominant framework claims universality by refusing to integrate experiences it cannot represent. In those moments, what feels like a crisis of meaning is not confusion caused by too much freedom or too much diversity. It is the pressure created when flattened time can no longer contain excluded histories, presents, and futures. There is a deeper consequence to this flattening. Systems with reduced temporal integration are not stable, they are brittle. They may function under fixed conditions, but they fail when conditions change. This is why societies that suppress temporal sensitivity experience change itself as crisis. Not because change is excessive, but because the capacity to integrate it has been reduced. From an evolutionary perspective, this matters. Biological and cognitive evolution move toward greater temporal sensitivity, richer memory, wider anticipation, finer attunement to context. Systems that collapse time do not halt change. They make themselves increasingly unable to live within it. And this damage is not limited to those who are excluded. Temporal truncation impoverishes the reality of everyone within the system, including those who believe they benefit from it. Oppression does not merely harm others, it produces a thinner, more fragile world for all. What all of this reveals is something simple but far-reaching. The experience of time is the common ground upon which the full diversity of the human experience is projected. Differences of culture, belief, identity, and history do not exist outside time. They are shaped by how pasts are integrated, presents are inhabited, and futures are opened or closed. PHET does not promise agreement. It doesn't promise harmony. What it offers is something more basic. A way to understand why shared reality depends on how time is integrated. Frameworks that truncate temporal integration produce brittle, exclusionary, and unstable realities. Frameworks that expand temporal integration increase understanding, tolerance, and resilience. This is not an ethical add-on. It's a structural fact. From an evolutionary perspective, this is not accidental. Life evolves toward greater temporal sensitivity, because sensitivity is what allows systems to adapt, survive, and remain resilient in time. In future videos, we'll return to this question from different angles. How science struggles with events, how AI predicts without understanding, how political systems fail when time collapses, and how new forms of shared temporal integration might be possible. But the core insight remains simple. Time is not just something that passes. It is something we do together. What counts as real depends on what counts as an event. What counts as an event depends on how time is integrated. And how time is integrated determines who counts. If time is something we do together, then the question isn't whether history matters, it's whether we can learn to share it. If you'd like to follow where this project goes, consider subscribing. I am, therefore I think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.